President Cyril Ramaphosa is calling for patience amid the ongoing rolling blackouts in this country. Power generation, infrastructure development, access to quality and affordable healthcare, all some of the issues that the National Development Plan seeks to address in the coming years. Now, the Deputy Chair of the National Planning Commission is Professor Tinyiko Maluleke. He believes that we need to take stock of how far we've come with the aspirations of the NDP. The Prof joins us now via our video link for more on his thoughts. And Prof, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. You know, I do wonder as we speak, and of course, our discussion comes on the back of the NPC marking 10 years since the adaptation of the NDP. And with the benefit of hindsight, I wonder whether you reckon our aspirations were just too ambitious and too broad to implement, or were we enemies of our own progress when it comes to just how badly we've come or how badly we've done in implementing some of these plans?
Look, our ambitions can never be too far-fetched and too broad. We have every right to set the goals that are lofty. We have every right to intend to reach that country which we struggled for. We shouldn't apologize for that. To ask for the elimination of poverty and inequality is not to ask too much. And that is what the National Development Plan does. So I wouldn't say that we have been wrong in raising the bar of our expectations and painting a picture of the South Africa of our dreams as it is painted in the National Development Plan. The fact that we have stumbled and not implemented many of the goals and objectives in it is not the fault of the National Development Plan. It is our fault. And what we need to review is precisely that, how we have failed to reach the necessary, the well-deserved goals that have been set in it. That's what we mean by the review. It's not so much to change what is in the National Development Plan, but to ask ourselves, how come we haven't managed, and how far are we from the course that we set for ourselves 10 years ago?
Yeah, and the answers to those questions, many might say, are quite obvious. They're glaring. We've lived in a country where those who are tasked in many instances in seeing to the implementation of some of the aspirations contained in this plan have been distracted by other things, and that's putting it mildly.
Yeah, indeed. But you see, Ayanda, here's the thing. The implementation of a long-term plan is not the same as the implementation of a short-term plan. When you implement a long-term plan, it means that there are many things you must do before the things that have to be done. For example, let's take the problem of load shedding that the country is experiencing right now. Part of the reason it cannot be resolved now and quickly and summarily is because the things that ought to have been done 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 8 years ago were not done. And that's how we lose track of where we are going as a country, when the things that need to be done ahead of the important things that need to happen are not done. So it's not a direct relationship between plan and implementation. It is plan and a lot of layers and layers of actions and interventions and preparations that have been neglected for a very long time, so that by now we have a collapse. And the role of the National Development Plan is precisely to help us not to fall asleep and not to realize that we need to lay out the railways. We need to prepare for load shedding. We need to vary our power grid and our power sources and so on. 5 years, 7 years, 8 years ahead. That's what the National Development Plan advises us to do, and those are the sorts of things we say we should go back to.
Yeah. You know, the country has changed dramatically, many might say, since the NDP first was adopted, you know, since the Green Paper at least was put forward back in 2010. Many might say, you know, we see the country very differently. There have been issues that have been brought into the public sphere that have, you know, really had a dramatic altering of how South Africans even relate to what our collective vision ought to be. With that in mind, and I know you've already said that we shouldn't necessarily change the contents of this plan, but do you reckon there's, space now to reconsider what we actually want in the next 10 years? Because what that is may be very different to what our answer would have been in 2010.
Look, I think South Africans have got every reason to be impatient, and they've got every reason to feel disappointed. But I do want to caution against some kind of a hurry in terms of analysis that is not substantiated. 10 years is not a long time. 10 years is what it takes to put up a plan and to implement it. The National Development Plan is only 10 years old. It is not 30 years old. It is not 20 years old. It is not 50 years old. And so we can't suggest that in 10 years the country has changed so much that we need to develop a new plan. Indeed, over the past 10 years, the problems have been the same. A 15-year-old South African does not know a South Africa without load shedding. And that has been the problem over the past 10 years. Over the past 10 years, we've seen an economy that has not grown. Over the past 10 years, we have seen poverty levels rise and unemployment levels rise. Those problems have not changed. So I don't know that we want goals that are different from the elimination and the tackling of these problems just within 10 years of the emergence of the plan. So I think, we have to stop blaming the plan and start blaming ourselves, blaming our government, and getting things in order so that we can get to do what needs to be done, not to keep seeking to change what we have. The worst thing that could happen is, of course, not to have a plan at all. Because if you don't have a plan, you don't even know what targets you are missing. You don't even know how far from which course you are. We do have a plan, and for God's sake, let us start laying down every layer that is necessary for this plan to become reality for South Africans.
I hear that. Point taken. But my goodness, Prof, we've been saying that for 10 years. And I guess that's what I was trying to point at. The discussions, the diagnostics, as is now becoming a cliche in this country, are always really good. It's quite impressive how we're able to self-examine. But it almost feels like there's this disconnect in this dialect of identifying what the problem is and getting on with it by fixing it.
Yeah, no, it is true. I don't think one can gainsay what you have just said now. It is true that we have not been very active in terms of implementation. But my sense is that where we have really failed is when we want to abandon all plans because we haven't implemented them. When we want to lower our vision of where we want to go because nothing has been done. I think what we need is for the whole country to come back to the plan and say, let's implement this plan and force, if you like, government to implement it. But of course, it's not merely the plan of government, it's the plan of everyone else. And I agree with you that we haven't done well over the past 10 years. There are a few things that have been done well enough, but not enough things have been done well enough. And that is the challenge that sits here before us. So we need to say 10 years from now, and I agree with you, 10 years from now, how do we make sure that the things that need to happen before the implementation are being done?
Yeah.
And that is our challenge to our government, and that has been our advice to government. You may have seen our statement on energy a month or two ago as the National Planning Commission. We made very concrete suggestions as to what interventions are necessary for South Africa to overcome load shedding in the shortest possible period. So we are also making those kinds of proposals, but we just don't want us to abandon our long-term plan, because if we abandon that, then we have no lodestar. We will become rudderless as a country, and we will not be able. You can't go to a destination you haven't set for yourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that this is not just government's plan, but the plan of the people, and I'm paraphrasing here. How do we ensure that the levels of hopelessness, which you also spoke about when the NPC was marking 10 years of this plan, don't deter people from even caring what the plan is, let alone working towards its implementation? And I think many will agree that the hopelessness, the sense of disillusionment is very justified, given, again, just how little progress we've made in changing the material conditions of people who've been looking to government to change them.
That indeed is our worry. That indeed is our fear as the National Planning Commission. We fear that very soon, if it is not reality already, South Africans will give up on government, will give up and lose all trust in the establishment. And they will begin to look for ways to fend for themselves in the most unbeautiful manner imaginable. And there is a sense in which we have begun to see that. The rich are already looking for ways to provide energy for and amongst themselves. The poor are jostling for pieces of bread, if you like, in the streets. And very soon you might have a nation that not only lacks hope, but also lacks trust, a nation that is on its own, without authority, where there will be lawlessness and everybody will try to look out for themselves in the most callous manner possible. And we see this even in the higher echelons of our society. We fear that reality, and that's why we are warning and we are calling out for South Africans and for governments to say, hey, we do have a long-term plan. We have not done well with it, but we need to keep to this plan and course correct insofar as we have drifted away from it. Because it's not merely the numbers, the targets, the interest rates, the unemployment rate and other rates that matter. It is the sense of gloom which envelopes South Africans as they live in this country, which they may have no choice but to live in, but actually have given up on. And that's really what we should all avoid, because if we reach that stage, what we saw in July last year will look like a picnic.
Sure. You speak about reaching that stage, not to be the pessimist of the day. Many will say perhaps we're already there. Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, thanks for your time and your take. Really do appreciate it this morning. Professor Maluleke speaking to us there in his capacity as the Deputy Chair of the National Planning Commission.